We all love a great story, don't we? And the best stories and the most memorable stories are the stories with heroes and heroines, that's a girl hero, who do great things, and they often do great things at sacrifice to themselves. They choose the right thing in the midst of really difficult circumstances, and most of the time it's just during the extraordinary circumstances that they get the credit. So think about if you got a bag of money that you found laying around that had like $5 million in it, and you went and returned it to the police. You would be all over the news, wouldn't you? Because everyone would say, wow, this is a hero. They did the right thing. But what if you spent like 2 hours trying to find somebody who had lost a penny? You might get a thank you, but nobody's going to write you up in the paper for that, right? You still did the right thing, but you were not in the midst of extraordinary circumstances to get the credit for that. But in the story that we're going to learn about today, we're going to see a hero and a heroine who were in very extraordinary circumstances, and they made the right choices. So today's lesson is on the story of Mordecai and his cousin Esther. Now this is set in the Persian Empire. Now remember from several weeks back, we talked about how Israel was exiled first into Assyria, and then the Babylonians came and conquered the Assyrians and brought out Judah. Remember we had that with the whole story of Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then we talked about Belshazzar with the writing on the wall. And when the writing on the wall happened, the Medes and the Persians came underneath the city through the dry riverbed. You guys remember that? And they took over Babylon. And that was the end of the Babylonian Empire. So King Cyrus was the king of the Persians, and he made an edict or a decree that said, hey, all you Israelites in captivity, you are free to go home, which was absolutely amazing, but not all of them went home. Some of them did, and they rebuilt the temple. That was the story of Ezra, if you guys remember that story. And a lot of them had to stay because it was really hard to get back, or they had jobs there, or for some reason or another. Among those who stayed were Mordecai and his cousin Esther. Now they lived in the capital city of Persia called Susa. Here we have it here. This whole purple area is the Persian Empire. Now Susa was the capital, and that's where the king lived. The king at this time was named Xerxes. Now Xerxes had a father whose name was Darius. This was not the Darius of Daniel in the Lion's Den. That was apparently a very popular name. But Darius looked across his great kingdom, and he was really mad because there was a little bitty area right here in Greece that would not be subject to his rule. Specifically, 2 cities that kind of governed themselves, named Athens and Sparta. And so Darius decided he was going to go defeat him. So he takes 120,000 soldiers. Now, the whole population of Clinton is only about 25,000. So about 5 times that many soldiers. And he goes and he takes boats and he comes across and tries to go over here to Greece. He's pretty confident because all he's doing is attacking Athens. Because Athens was the only group that could muster enough troops to fight him. They have about 11,000 people against 120,000. Guess what? He lost. He lost! Because Athens were athletes. The Olympic Games started in Athens, and they were big-time soldiers, and they beat them. So Darius goes back, and he is so mad that he makes this vow that I am going to defeat Greece at all costs. And so he starts getting his army ready, and he's going to do it. And he gets it all ready and geared up, and then he dies. Major problem. Right? So his son Xerxes comes to power. Well, Xerxes is just as mad as he is. He says, I'm going to take on that vow, and we're going to beat Greece because they have no business telling us that we're not going to rule them. And so he starts gathering an army, but guess how many people he got in his army? 2 million. There are only like less than 3 million people in the entire state of Mississippi. So he gets this massive, massive army, and he's getting ready to go, and he has this 7-day banquet to show how great he is and how great his kingdom is. And at the end of that 7 days, he calls in his queen. His queen's name is Vashti. And he says, come in, Vashti, I want everybody to see how beautiful you are. You know what she does? She says, no thanks. And she refuses. Well, that doesn't go over very well. So her consequence is she is banished, and another queen is going to be chosen. But before the queen is chosen, he decides it's time. It's time to go to Greece. So he takes his 2 million soldiers and he marches across the land because there weren't enough boats to carry 2 million people, right? So he goes across the land from Susa all the way up here. And when he gets up here, there's a little strait. A strait is about, it's a big body of water that they couldn't get across, and they didn't have big bridges. And it was about a mile long. And so what he did is he lined up boats. And then he built a bridge on top of his boats. And he marched his soldiers across in 2 lines for 7 days and 7 nights, marching continuously. That's how long it took for 2 million soldiers to cross over 1 mile of water. That's a lot of soldiers. So he comes down Greece, and there's no way he's going to lose. Because Greece, just little tiny cities, and they're not even a country united at this point. And so there's no way. So he marches in confident, and guess what? He was not prepared for the guys from Athens, and specifically from Sparta. Spartans were like the Navy SEALs of today. Their mamas told them that you better come back from battle holding your shield or on it, meaning you were dead. There is no giving up. And so these Spartans and some other guys held this pass off for several days until a traitor goes and tells Xerxes, hey, guess what? There's another way around. And so they come around and they beat them. But in the meantime, it gave enough time for Athens to run away from the city and get in their boats. All the people of Athens are in boats. And so when they get there, the huge Persian army gets to Athens, they burn the whole city, and then they go find them in the boats. And another guy from Greece pretends like he's going to be a traitor again. And he goes and tells Xerxes, hey, this is what you should do. Split up your boats into 2 sections and surround them, just like you did at that battle at Thermopylae, which is the pass that you came in. And so Xerxes did it. And he sits up on the throne. He has his throne sitting up here. And he looks down like he's watching a toy sea battle. And he's going to watch the victory. And guess what? He lost! His 2 million soldiers lost. These little bitty city-states, several city-states, beat him because they were fighting on either side and there were so many boats that they were crashing into each other. Well, Xerxes is really, really mad at this point. Can you imagine? He comes against just thousands of people and he loses his 2 million man army. So he goes back home like a puppy dog with his tail between his legs, and he goes home and pouts. And when he gets home, he realizes, I forgot that I banished my queen. This is really bad. And so he's super mad at this point. And so they say, hey, why don't you have a beauty contest? That's a good way to get a queen. He says, sure, that sounds like a good idea. So they go and get all the young women of the whole kingdom. Remember how big this is? Anybody that's beautiful and young and unmarried to see who can be in the beauty contest. So in the middle of Susa is a Jew named Mordecai. And his cousin named Esther lives with him because he's raised her because she's an orphan. And she's beautiful. So she gets entered in the contest. Long story short, Mordecai says, don't tell them you're a Jew. And Esther wins the contest. She gets the crown, she gets to be queen, and she gets to rule, but nobody knows that she's a Jew. And in the meantime, Mordecai keeps coming to the city gates to check on Esther. How's she doing? Is everything okay? And he overhears a plot to kill the king. These 2 guys are going to assassinate him. So Mordecai goes and tells Esther. Esther goes and tells the king in the name of Mordecai. And the king investigates, and it's true. So they have these guys executed. And then they write down kind of in the king's like personal journal, hey, Mordecai the Jew found out this plot. And that's the end of the story. Nothing was done to Mordecai. So in the middle of that time, King Xerxes decides he needs a vizier or somebody that's kind of second in command. Kind of like Joseph was to Pharaoh, y'all remember that? And so he makes a man named Haman his second in command. Now Haman is an Agagite. That's a weird word to say. But it basically meant that he was a descendant of the Amalekites. If anybody remembers the Amalekites from the Old Testament, God told Saul, King Saul, to destroy all the Amalekites. And guess what? He didn't. and he lost his kingship because he did not obey God fully. And Haman was a descendant of the Amalekites, and Mordecai refused to bow down to him. So every time Haman would walk by when everybody else is throwing themselves down on the floor saying, "Oh, you are great because you're second in command over the whole Persian kingdom," Mordecai stood up. Well, how do you think Haman felt about that? He was mad. And so he goes home and he starts plotting, how can I get back, not only at Mordecai, but back at all the Jews, because Mordecai had told him that he was a Jew. And so he took something called lots, which is kind of like throwing dice or choosing straws or something, to figure out a day that would be the best day in order to kill all the Jews in the entire kingdom, the entire province. And so he finds the right date. He goes to the king and he says, "Oh, king, there are a bunch of people in your kingdom, and they don't follow your laws, and they really are not good for your kingdom, and you don't really have need of them, so let's get rid of them. If you write a royal edict to get rid of them on this particular day, then I'll put a whole bunch of silver in your royal treasury." Well, Xerxes says, "Okay, that sounds good," but Haman didn't tell him who it was. He didn't say it was the Jews. And so the king writes an edict. They send out an edict to the 127 provinces all over the Persian Empire that on this particular day, everybody gets to kill the Jews. Well, Mordecai hears this, and he is so upset. He wears sackcloth, he sits at the city gates, and he's so sad about this. And so Esther hears about him, that he's sad. What's going on? And he sends word, look what happened. Here is the edict. And Esther's like, what do you want me to do about it? Mordecai wants her to do something. She says, I can't go into the king. I haven't been summoned to the king for 30 days. And if I go into the king unannounced and he doesn't raise out his scepter to me, then I'm going to get killed. And this is what Mordecai says to her. Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. So what Mordecai believed is that God was true to his promise. That God had told Abraham that he was going to make a great nation of him. That they were going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand in the seashore. And that not only that, but the Messiah was going to come from Abraham, and through him, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. And so Mordecai says God's going to do that. And he might not use you to do it, but if you don't stand up now, you're going to die just like all the rest of us. And so Esther finally says, you're right. God is going to do something. I'm going to attempt to be part of it. And she says, if I perish, I perish. And she goes before the king after 3 days of fasting. And the king holds out his scepter. What is it, queen? What do you want? Up to half my kingdom, I'll give it to you. And she got favor in his eyes. And she said, this is what I want. I want you and Haman to come to a banquet that I've prepared for you tonight. Sure thing, we'll do it. So Haman and Xerxes go to the banquet. And at the banquet, he asks her again, what do you want? Up to half my kingdom, I'll give it to you. She says, come to another banquet. Will you come to a banquet tomorrow night for me? And then I'll tell you. No problem. So when Haman leaves, he's feeling great. I'm the only one that the queen invited to this banquet. But when he walks out, he sees Mordecai. And Mordecai refuses to bow. He is so mad. What is wrong with this guy? So he goes home to his family and says, what should I do about this? And they say, well, build a gallows 75 feet tall and ask if the king will let you hang him on it. He says, that sounds like a good idea. So he starts having the gallows built. Well, that very night, the king cannot sleep. And so he calls in somebody to read him his journals. And amazingly, the part that they get to was the part about Mordecai. Mordecai had not been rewarded. So he says, hey, why didn't we do anything for this guy? What should we do to him? Go look in the courtyard, see if anybody's there. Well, here comes Haman. You know what Haman was coming to do? Ask the king if he could hang Mordecai. So he walks into the king, and the king says, Hey, Haman, glad you're here. What should the king do to the man that he desires to honor? And Haman thinks, well, who else could he want to honor but me? I'm the only one that got invited to this banquet by the queen. And so Haman says, this is what you should do, king. Take a royal robe that you have worn and put it on him. And let him ride on a horse that you have ridden on. And have somebody stand before him and yell, this is what the king does to the man that he desires to honor. And the king says, that sounds great. What a good idea. Go do that for Mordecai the Jew. This was not good for Haman. Can you imagine how horrified he is? So he has to walk through and parade through the whole city saying, this is what is to be done for the man that the king desires to honor, with Mordecai on the horse. He goes home and he is so humiliated. And when he gets home, he says, what am I going to do? This is horrible. And his wife says, hey, if he's a Jew, you're going to fall before him. There's nothing you can do. The implication being, well, God is on his side. And so as soon as he goes home and this happens, they rush in and say, you got to get to the banquet. So here comes Haman to the banquet. So here we are at the banquet. And remember, Esther hasn't told the king that she's a Jew because Mordecai told her, don't say anything. And so at the banquet, the king says again, Esther, what do you want done for you? Up to half my kingdom, I'll give it to you. And she says, I want my life. And I want the life of my people. For we have been sold and we're all about to die. And the king says, who has done this wicked thing? Haman. Well, the king's furious. So he goes out into the garden to kind of simmer down a little bit. And when he comes back in, Haman has thrown himself on Esther's couch, begging for his life. And he thinks that he's trying to hurt her. So he comes in and says, will you even hurt the queen? And they put a cover over his face, which is a sign that he's about to be executed. And one of the guards says, hey, he's built a gallows 75 feet high for Mordecai. King says, hang him on it. So thus ends Haman. And in Haman's place, Mordecai rises to power. So Mordecai gets Haman's job, and since they can't revoke the law, because once a Persian king makes a law, it's all over. They can't take it back because what his word, or whatever his word is absolute law. And so they write a new edict. And the new edict is, on this day when all the Jews are supposed to be slaughtered, they can defend themselves. And so that's what happens. On that day, when they were supposed to be destroyed, they killed like over 75,000 of their enemies. But beforehand, they weren't given permission. They were just going to get killed, and now they can kill other people. And so what was going to be a great day of destruction becomes a great day of rejoicing. And the Jews still celebrate it. It's a feast called Purim, P-U-R-I-M, because the word for lots was P-U-R, pure. And so it was celebrating that. Even though Haman was casting lots against them, God changed it, and he rescued all the people. And so Mordecai and Esther were the heroes of the story. But remember I told you earlier that it wasn't necessarily because just making right choices that they became known as heroes. It was extraordinary circumstances. And who was guiding those circumstances? It was God. All through history, what we've seen as we study the Old Testament is that God has guided circumstances to bring his words to pass so that everything that he speaks proves true. He guarded his people, he protected his people, and those who went against him were destroyed. So the question remains for us, because we all want to be heroes, don't we? It's a cool thing to be written about in a story and to get the praise of men, to say, wow, you did something great. But you know what? Heroes come and go, don't they? Because praise for 1 week, next week, it's gone. They don't remember what you did. And so we want to be a hero in the eyes of God. And how do we do that? Well, how were Esther and Mordecai heroes? They believed God. They believed that he was who he said he was going to be, and he was going to do what he said that he was going to do, and therefore they obeyed and acted accordingly. And in God's record book of heroes, The most famous one is Hebrews 11, which is known as the Hall of Faith, and it's all the heroes of faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things unseen. And Hebrews 11, verse 6 says that without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For those who come to God must believe, number one, that He is who He says He is, and number two, that He is a rewarder of those who seek Him. Must believe that He is who He says He is, and that He's a rewarder of those who seek Him. And those who believe that, those are the ones that are counted in the Hall of Faith. Because they believe and then they do something about that. Remember Abraham? He's one of the first ones that's listed in the Hall of Faith. Abraham was raising his knife to kill his son Isaac. And you know what Hebrews 11 says? That he believed that if he did it, God would raise him back from the dead. Because God's word was so sure that God said, I'm going to make a great nation through Isaac. And so if God had him kill him, He would have to raise him back from the dead. That's faith. That's believing that God is who He says He is and that you do something about it. And everyone, like Esther, remember what Mordecai said? Perhaps, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. You are in a specific time and a specific place for a specific reason. And you might look at this and go, why am I living through a pandemic? This is not where I want to be. Or why am I in this particular circumstance or that particular circumstance? Why am I living in Clinton, Mississippi? This is what Acts chapter 17 says. God made from one man, Adam, every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times, that means your time in history, and the boundaries of their habitation. That means your geographical location. Right now, it's Clinton, Mississippi. That they would seek God. Why do you live here in 2020 in Clinton, Mississippi? Acts 17 says it's so that you would seek God. And every circumstance is pushing you in that direction so that you may seek God, that you may find Him, that you may believe that what He says is true, and you might act accordingly. That you show by your actions that you actually believe and that you are affirming the Word of God as truth. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth, looking for someone whose heart is completely His, so that He may show Himself strong on their behalf. When His eyes roam the earth looking, will His eyes rest on you?